I don't see it as cutting at all. My brother and I love each other. I love him deeply. There has been a lot of pain is ever intended to hurt my family, but it does give a full picture of
Just when the royal saga seemed settled, a stunning reversal sent shockwaves through the palace. Prince Harry's title was quietly restored, reigniting hope, outrage, and whispers of reconciliation. But that hope barely had time to breathe. Within hours, insiders revealed an emergency response so swift it felt almost ruthless. Phones rang, advisors scrambled, and history threatened to repeat itself. Why was the title returned at all? Who authorized it? And what explosive revelation triggered its immediate dramatic gratification that stunned even senior royals watching behind closed doors? When the palace line finally snapped. Nothing in the long memory of royal tension prepared Britain for the tone that cut through living rooms that night. This was not a pause, not a reshuffle, not a quiet retreat from duty. It felt final, sharp, and deeply personal. After months out of public view, King Charles reappeared with words that carried weight rather than warmth. Broadcast across the UK and echoed through the Commonwealth, his address sounded less like a father and more like a guardian, drawing a line. Calm on the surface, unmistakably firm beneath it, every sentence landed with intent. The anger had not arrived overnight. Palace aides later hinted that the strain had been building for years, worn thin by what insiders privately mocked as constant noise and spectacle. Charles spoke of dignity as something fragile, something easily damaged, and his criticism cut close to home. Meghan, he suggested, had treated royal status not as a responsibility but as leverage, using Harry's name as a passport into elite circles that had little interest in the crown itself. The language was severe enough to make historians uneasy, recalling moments in royal history when family fractures became national scars. Yet Harry was not spared. There was no coded sympathy, no softened phrasing. The king described a son who had traded caution for applause and loyalty for attention, a man too willing to mistake admiration for purpose. The message beneath the restraint was clear. Patience had run out. What finally pushed matters beyond repair did not unfold in London or Windsor, but thousands of miles away, under California lights. At a lavish birthday gathering in Hollywood, a room crowded with power brokers, tech giants, and celebrity royalty, tensions spilled into public view. According to those present, Meghan demanded the removal of select photos from social media, citing permissions and agreements hosts insist never existed. Staff were caught off guard. Guests whispered. Laughter followed. Back in Britain, the palace did not laugh. To officials, it looked like a former duchess asserting authority she no longer held, and the embarrassment traveled fast. Charles had spent decades reshaping the monarchy for a modern age, defending its relevance through restraint. This moment, aides say, confirmed a fear he had quietly carried since 2018, that the institution itself had never been understood, only used. Still, the deepest rupture came from Harry. While Prince William stood on an international stage at a climate summit in Brazil, representing the crown, Harry appeared unannounced in Canada. When questioned, he claimed palace approval. None existed. No emails, no briefings, no record in official logs. To the king, this was not a mix-up. It was something far more dangerous, a public assertion of royal backing where none had been given, and a trust, quietly, decisively broken. So when Prince Harry claimed royal authority without King Charles's consent, who truly held the power? Keep watching to find out. A decision made in silence. The moment felt heavier than scandal. What unfolded inside palace walls was no longer treated as family tension, but as a test of authority itself. when a carefully worded message emerged from Meghan's circle declaring that Prince Harry required no approval and answered to no advisors, it landed badly in London. To royal officials, this was not a claim of freedom. It was a challenge to the structure that had governed Windsor for generations. Independence, they believed, was being used to excuse defiance. Behind closed doors, restraint finally gave way to clarity. King Charles, known for measured language, reportedly spoke with rare bluntness during a private briefing. He no longer framed the issue as a misunderstanding or emotional strain. Instead, he focused on how royal identity had been carried beyond its limits, turned into a tool rather than a responsibility. Harry, in his view, had allowed himself to become a symbol rather than a steward, a name used to gain access rather than to serve. When the king stated that responsibility follows permission, the room reportedly fell quiet. The implication was unmistakable. From that point forward, the conversation shifted. Titles and remaining honors were no longer discussed as personal privileges but as vulnerabilities. As long as they existed, they could be displayed, implied, or traded upon. Removing them was seen internally as a safeguard, not retaliation. Palace lawyers and senior aides began reviewing precedents, focusing on how symbols of status could be withdrawn without igniting constitutional fallout. In the background of these discussions, one comparison kept resurfacing. Charles reportedly recalled an earlier episode involving Prince William, years before the current crisis. After winning a lawsuit against a major British newspaper, William chose not to keep the compensation. Instead, he quietly directed the funds to charitable causes, including support for the Invictus Games. There was no announcement, no expectation of praise. The absence of public acknowledgement from Harry lingered in the king's mind. To him, it highlighted a widening divide between quiet duty and visible unraveling. By early November, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace had changed noticeably. On the evening of November 6th, aides sensed finality in the king's movements. Meetings became shorter. Language grew precise. This was no longer a matter for family intermediaries or informal warnings. What had begun as reputational strain was now classified as a structural concern, something that required firm action. Over the following 72 hours, a tightly controlled group of advisors worked with urgency. Every phrase, every protocol, every historical reference was weighed carefully. The goal was containment, not drama. What mattered was protecting the integrity of the institution before its symbols could be stretched any further, ensuring that the crown remained defined by its own boundaries rather than by those willing to test them. If William acted quietly with purpose, why had Harry's choices forced Charles into decisive action? Stick around to see the palace close ranks. The night. The palace closed its ranks. That evening carried a different weight. Long after the corridors of Buckingham Palace had emptied, the king called a small circle into his private study. No aides hovered, no pleasantries were exchanged. Only 3 figures were present, chosen not for ceremony, but for consequence. The Lord Chamberlain, a gatekeeper of tradition, the king's private secretary, trusted with the crown's most sensitive decisions, and a veteran communication strategist whose reputation had been forged during earlier royal storms. They remained standing. This was not a meeting meant to linger. What followed was swift and deliberate. The king made it clear he wanted every remaining thread examined and removed, and he wanted it done before the week was out. This was not about gesture or symbolism. Internally, it was understood as the most forceful recalibration of royal status since the constitutional shock of 1936, when Edward VIII walked away from the throne. But unlike that moment, this decision was shaped to project control, not regret. The focus quickly turned practical. Yes, Harry and Meghan had stepped back in 2020, but vestiges remained. Titles still carried weight abroad. styles still appeared in formal references. Their names continued to echo through charitable and commercial spaces tied loosely to royal identity. To Charles, that ambiguity was the problem. If they were no longer working royals, then nothing about them should imply otherwise. The instruction was blunt: remove the confusion entirely. Within hours, archives were opened and precedents reviewed. Old letters patent issued under Queen Elizabeth II were re-examined alongside lesser-known historical cases. The aim was consistency, not drama. Decisions followed fast. The Sussex designation would no longer be usable in any venture, public or private. UK-based styles would vanish from court records and Commonwealth communications. Meghan would not be introduced or acknowledged as royalty in any official setting. From crown-backed platforms to formal correspondence, the language would change quietly, but completely. Silence was part of the strategy. No explanations, no emotional framing. Communications were locked down with near-military discipline. The message, when it came, needed to feel final, not defensive. Behind the scenes, scenarios were mapped out with care. The palace anticipated pushback, reinterpretation, even provocation. Plans ranged from total quiet for 48 hours to tightly worded statements that placed the institution above individuals, values above personalities. Amid the operational urgency, the king made one personal request. He wanted the public to understand that this was not an act of bitterness. In subtle contrast, carefully selected images from earlier years were prepared for release. Moments of Charles with a younger Harry, reminders of patience and effort already spent. It was not a plea for sympathy, but context. Privately, however, the restraint cracked. In a closed meeting, Charles spoke with a severity few had ever heard. He described Meghan as a destabilizing force and made it clear he no longer considered her part of the family structure he was sworn to protect. The words were final, not theatrical. Throughout it all, Prince William remained outwardly silent, yet deeply involved. Sources later confirmed that he fully supported the decision. He believed the monarchy's future could not be held hostage by recurring conflict. Still, he set one boundary of his own: no personal attacks, no public humiliation, just closure. 2 days later, at a charity event in East London, William appeared calm and composed, declining questions with a practiced smile, sending a quiet signal that the palace had already turned the page. But if restraint guided William, why did the palace move so decisively toward erasure? Keep watching to find out. The morning the ledger changed. While the language of the order was quietly refined behind closed doors, another process unfolded across Buckingham Palace, one colder and more final. This was not about speeches or appearances, it was about erasure. Symbols were adjusted first. Harry's coat of arms was lifted from ceremonial records without announcement. Protocol teams revisited long-standing rules, especially concerning future visits to royal residences in the UK. Meghan's name began disappearing from internal systems, removed from digital registers that tracked royal association. Even slips and titles were corrected, line by line, as if history itself were being rewritten with precision. Staff described the atmosphere as controlled and unnerving. Corridors were hushed. Instructions were brief. One longtime aide, who had served since Elizabeth II's reign, later remarked that this felt unlike any previous scandal. Divorces, controversies, and public embarrassments had come and gone, but this resembled a permanent recalibration of the royal order, a careful pruning of what belonged to the crown and what did not. Before dawn on November 10th, King Charles was already awake. At 6 a.m., he sat with his private secretary to review the final draft. The document was strikingly plain. No emotion, no flourish, just a clean declaration that removed the last remaining privileges attached to Harry and Meghan. 2 names were quietly struck from the ledger. 1 signature followed. That was all. When the announcement reached the public later that day, it landed with unexpected force. The wording was restrained, yet the impact immediate. International headlines abandoned diplomacy, replaced by disbelief and blunt commentary. But the loudest reaction erupted online. Social platforms ignited almost instantly, turning the decision into a global debate. Supporters framed Meghan as a modern figure punished for independence, comparing the move to outdated royal rigidity. Critics argued the opposite, calling the decision overdue and necessary. Silence from the palace amplified the noise, turning restraint into spectacle. In Britain, public sentiment leaned sharply toward approval. A rapid poll conducted the next morning showed strong support for removing Harry's remaining honors, with most agreeing Meghan should be included. Across the Commonwealth, responses were more mixed. In Canada and Australia, many cited confusion, saying the Sussexes' status had long been unclear. Jamaica reflected similar uncertainty rather than outrage. Inside the palace, alignment was firm. William offered quiet backing without hesitation. Prince Edward reportedly described the move as inevitable. Queen Camilla urged caution, aware any hint of hostility could be exploited. By then, Charles's focus had narrowed. Clarity mattered more than optics. One senior aide later recalled a brief comment from the king after the broadcast. It was not meant for effect. He spoke of how royal identity had been turned into a brand, something worn and sold rather than carried. To him, that line had been crossed. The order itself did not explain motives or revisit old wounds. It didn't need to. Years of restraint, disappointment, and unresolved tension sat behind its concise lines. What the public saw as a decisive institutional move also carried something quieter beneath it. The weight of a father who had spent decades balancing duty and patience, only to recognize that some breaches could not be repaired and that some breaks demanded finality. But if decades of patience weren't enough, what finally made the palace act? Stick around to find out. The breaking point at Buckingham Palace. Inside the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, tension simmered beneath every polished surface. This was more than protocol or public image. It was frustration rooted in years of heartbreak and mounting concern. King Charles had watched his youngest son grow from a spirited, unpredictable boy into a man who increasingly seemed to drift from the family he once loved. Memories of Harry laughing after tragedy, a spark amid sorrow, fueled Charles's internal conflict. He had tried to hold the family together, awkwardly, but with determination. Friends and aides recall his repeated, often private, efforts to bridge emotional gaps that never fully healed. He never knew how to show it, one aide reflected, but his love for Harry was unwavering. That care persisted even as adulthood tested it. Charles shielded Harry from public embarrassment, from Las Vegas photos to tabloid outrage, while palace teams worked tirelessly to contain fallout. There was a quiet hope he would one day return fully to the fold. That hope faltered when Meghan Markle entered the picture. She captivated audiences, charmed the media, and delivered speeches with poise and precision. Yet behind the palace doors, Charles's instinct was cautious. Meghan, he felt, wasn't merely joining the institution. She was reshaping it to fit her ambitions. Every public move seemed calculated, every appearance calibrated. "She isn't adapting to the crown," a former press secretary noted. "She's adapting the crown to herself." Over time, Charles came to see Harry less as a partner and more as an extension of her brand. A prince used to advance her vision while quietly criticizing the very system that gave him his status. The strain grew as Harry's public persona increasingly collided with family expectations. Televised interviews, podcasts, and documentaries painted intimate disputes in stark relief, often leaving William and Charles unprotected in the court of public opinion. Yet the deepest wounds came from omission. Harry never acknowledged efforts made for him, From Charles guiding Meghan down the aisle to William quietly donating proceeds from legal settlements to the Invictus Games. Each unspoken acknowledgement deepened the king's despair. The contrast between William's quiet service and Harry's visible self-promotion crystallized a painful truth. The path Harry had chosen was one of spectacle, not stewardship. When an unapproved trip to Canada surfaced, it wasn't merely a protocol breach. Harry appeared at events under royal titles, photographed beneath banners implying official patronage. Local media headlines misrepresented his role, prompting urgent calls from diplomats seeking clarity. Was he acting on behalf of the crown? The answer, humiliatingly, was no. Charles reportedly remarked to a trusted aide, "I let him go. I didn't expect him to come back with a flag." The king felt mocked, misrepresented, and cornered. Quietly, carefully, he moved to assert authority. The resolution took the form of a historic royal order, stripping Harry and Meghan of every remaining title, honor, and recognition that implied royal endorsement. Drafted with meticulous care and communicated with precision, the decree reflected decades of restrained disappointment. When Charles delivered the message publicly, the act was not of anger alone. It was institutional, a calculated measure to protect legacy, hierarchy, and symbolism. Sources say that later in the blue drawing room, Charles paused before Queen Elizabeth's portrait and whispered, "Mommy, forgive me, but the boy you loved no longer walks with us." This decision, both personal and constitutional, marked a turning point. It was the culmination of a father's heartbreak, a king's duty, and a palace's need to preserve order, a seismic act that reshaped the narrative of monarchy itself. If the Sussexes could act without permission, how would the crown respond? Stay tuned. This changes everything. The new monarchy in motion. Behind the polished statements and public calm, the palace was quietly reshaping itself. King Charles III's dramatic declaration against Harry and Meghan was more than a rebuke. It was a statement of intent, a signal that the monarchy's future would no longer be muddled by spectacle or divided loyalty. In the wake of the Sussex severance, the crown moved swiftly, almost surgically, to ensure that symbolism, influence, and responsibility aligned with duty rather than celebrity. Within days, palace insiders report 3 major initiatives were quietly enacted. Minor royals' secondary patronages were reviewed for relevance. Future funding through the sovereign grant was frozen for those without active public roles, and a confidential audit analyzed engagements for public reception, media impact, and generational appeal. The message was subtle but clear. Prominence would be earned, not inherited, and no position was untouchable. Into the space left by Harry and Meghan stepped the Prince and Princess of Wales. William, long cast as the cautious heir, emerged as the monarchy's quiet anchor. His presence now carries weight in every setting. From youth mental health summits to environmental forums, imbued with understated symbolism. The Earthshot Prize, once his personal initiative, now represents the Crown's mission-driven approach, signaling continuity, responsibility, and public relevance. Catherine, meanwhile, has become the moral and emotional center of the monarchy. Her work in early childhood education and mental health, already widely praised, now shines even brighter, balancing tradition with modern expectations. Observers describe her influence as a form of First Lady diplomacy, wielded without the need for speeches or headlines, a steady counterpoint to the turbulence surrounding her brother-in-law. But outside the palace walls, control was harder to maintain. The digital world erupted almost immediately. TikTok creators framed Charles's statement as outdated moralism, while YouTube commentators debated whether he had defended the crown or deepened its disconnect with younger audiences. Instagram split factions between Catherine's admirers and Meghan's supporters, while trending hashtags became battlegrounds over perception and loyalty. In this fragmented landscape, Every appearance, absence, or story was scrutinized and litigated in real time. The palace's authority was asserted, but the public's judgment was decentralized, algorithmic, and immediate. Even erased from formal records, Harry and Meghan remained impossible to ignore. Their every engagement, red carpets, tech panels, or press appearances, prompted questions. Rogue royals, public celebrities, or private citizens, victims of palace cruelty, or architects of their own downfall. That ambiguity, though unintended, ensured they lingered at the center of the narrative. Charles's original goal, clarity and control, now shared the stage with ongoing public debate. A reminder that in the modern age, monarchy is not just about heritage. It is performance, perception, and the constant negotiation of relevance. Monarchy on the edge. The palace corridors hummed with quiet tension, a sense of purpose masked by stillness. Charles had drawn his line, and within Buckingham's walls, every detail of the Sussex severance was being executed with surgical precision. Minor royal patronages were reviewed, funding for inactive roles was frozen, and public engagements were scrutinized for relevance. The monarchy's message was clear. Authority, duty, and relevance now outweighed tradition or spectacle. In the void left by Harry and Meghan, William and Catherine emerged as stabilizing forces. Every public appearance, from youth mental health summits to environmental initiatives, was imbued with deliberate symbolism. The Earthshot Prize became more than an award. It became a statement of purpose. Catherine's advocacy for early childhood education and mental health projected quiet moral authority, a counterbalance to the turbulence that had rocked the crown. But the world outside Buckingham was less orderly. Social media ignited instantly, debates flaring across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Critics framed Charles's action as cold and outdated. Supporters praised his defense of the institution. The monarchy's authority was no longer contained within palace walls. It was contested, dissected, and reshaped in real time. Amid the digital firestorm, polling data began to emerge, offering a more structured perspective. In Britain, 63% of respondents supported the full severance of Harry's ties, and 71% backed stricter standards for royal branding. Yet among those under 30, only 41% felt the monarchy remained relevant. Tradition was reaffirmed, but generational connection lagged behind. Internationally, reactions were equally complex. Jamaica applauded the discipline, prompting conversations about independence. Australia saw Republican movements gain momentum, citing the purge as proof of rigidity. In Canada, debates intensified over modernization versus heritage, and across Commonwealth nations, royal actions were closely scrutinized, becoming both a benchmark and a cautionary tale. Even erased from official records, Harry and Meghan remained impossible to ignore. Their every public move, red carpets, tech panels, or interviews, rekindled questions about identity and influence. Were they rogue royals, celebrities, or private citizens? Victims of palace rigidity or architects of their own narrative? The crown had asserted discipline, hierarchy, and institutional strength, but relevance was still a work in progress. Transparency, mission-driven work, and careful communication would determine whether this recalibrated monarchy could maintain public trust in a fast-moving, hyper-connected world. The line had been drawn, but the ultimate judgment now belonged to the public. So with the Sussexes still making headlines everywhere, how does a centuries-old institution stay relevant? Let's find out. Life after the Sussex severance. The palace felt oddly still, yet electric, as if the very walls were holding their breath. In the wake of King Charles's unprecedented move to strip Harry and Meghan of their royal privileges, the monarchy entered a phase suspended between restoration and reinvention. Outwardly, the royal calendar continued. Engagements proceeded, photos were staged, and headlines cooled. But beneath that surface, a subtle transformation was quietly unfolding. The institution was no longer merely defending its past, it was defining a post-Sussex identity. Every carefully curated image, every public appearance now carried the unmistakable weight of symbolism. Prince William and Princess Catherine had stepped into roles that transcended titles. They became the visible, emotional anchors of the crown, a calm counterpoint to the turbulence left in Sussex's wake. William, once cautious and deliberate, now projected quiet authority. Not only heir, but guardian of the Windsor brand, he embodied dignity preserved through restraint. Catherine, with her steady record of poise and compassion, was no longer merely admired. She was essential to the monarchy's moral center, a subtle but unshakable force that modernized the crown without eroding its traditions. Together, their appearances spoke volumes. Youth, mental health, summits, environmental initiatives, and diplomatic receptions were more than events. They were deliberate signals of relevance, continuity, and responsibility. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan occupied a peculiar space. Stripped of titles yet unshakably present in public consciousness, they hovered between celebrity and former royalty, their influence stubbornly lingering. Sources suggest Meghan plans a media relaunch in 2026, deliberately separating herself from royal narratives, but the absence of her Duchess title casts uncertainty over her brand. Harry's path is equally ambiguous. Advocacy, memoirs, or speaking engagements may come next, yet the crown has reclaimed what was once inseparable from his identity. For a man defined for decades as a prince, this quiet erasure may mark a profound personal reckoning. For King Charles, the decision was not punitive. It was preservation. Close aides insist that, though he felt sorrow for the familial fractures, the act was one of institutional safeguarding. The line he drew was decisive, yet it left a lingering ghost. The monarchy's authority is no longer communicated through decrees alone. Narratives, images, podcasts, and social media now shape perception as much as any official statement. Charles's preservation of the crown exists alongside a constant negotiation with public opinion, where a single misstep or viral post can reshape centuries of legacy overnight. In this post-Sussex world, the monarchy stands recalibrated, William and Catherine at its heart, Harry and Meghan in limbo, and the king balancing tradition with the urgent demands of modern scrutiny. The question that now echoes quietly through palace corridors and global media alike is as simple as it is complex. What does it mean to be royal when visibility, relevance, and legacy are no longer guaranteed by birthright alone? So, what do you think? Has the monarchy truly redefined itself post-Sussex? Or are Harry and Meghan's absences reshaping royal influence in ways the crown can't control? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to share them in the comments below.